Hey Forever family, welcome back to Celebrate Recovery Crisis Response. I'm a grateful believer in Jesus Christ. I struggle with codependency, anger, and anxiety, and my name is Frankie. Hey, real quick, if this is your very first time with us, welcome. We're so glad that you are here. I won't keep you for very long. I just have a couple of announcements. First off, if this is your very first time with us, shoot me an email, frankie@communitychurch.com. I would love to connect with you, plug you in with some awesome people that can help you in this new journey that you are beginning. Second is this, we are ready to start some new step studies. Step studies are just the meat of the recovery program. So we will dig into the program deeper. They are organized on an off night from our Tuesday nights. So some of them may be happening on Thursday nights. If you're interested in those, let me know, frankie@communitychurch.com. Shoot me an email. I would love to get you signed up. If you're willing to lead one of those, let me know as well. We can have those in person. We can also have those online, but we are currently looking for people that are willing to meet in person for those. All right, we will social distance and all will be safe there for those. That's the end of the announcements for me. Love you guys. So glad that you're here. And now here's Leisa to share her story with us tonight. Love y'all.
I'm a grateful believer in Jesus Christ in recovery for alcoholism and depression. My name is Leisa. I grew up in a small town on a dairy farm. There was never a time I doubted I was loved, even cherished by my parents, sisters, and grandparents. I was a compliant child who loved the outdoors, my family, school, and church. My mother took us to church every time the doors were open, and in the summers, that was a lot of days, the only times I ever saw people all week. But all was not perfect. Starting around age 5, my innocence was taken. As a result, a pattern of guilt, shame, and the need to hide began. Around the time I was 10, I started having depression and suicidal thoughts. My father worked long hours, 7 days a week. I longed to be around him and needed his approval and acceptance. Because of his infidelity, he was distant and did not want me or anyone else around. By the time I was 11, guilt, shame, fear, and rejection were firmly established. I was an honor roll student, a good athlete, and well-liked, voted most friendly several times. But on the inside, I was someone else who wondered, why do I have to be alive, or why can't I just die? No one I knew would have suspected I felt that way. My senior year, on the same weekend, my cousin and good friend was killed in a car wreck, and my neighbors were brutally murdered. Depression and fear overwhelmed me for several months. I'd started smoking when I was 10 or so and started drinking at 15, then added marijuana to the mix my senior year. High school and college were days of partying. I worked all the hours I could get and stayed on the honor roll, but also drank every day. From the first time I took a drink, I loved it and I loved myself. I loved the feeling of being someone else and feeling free from the anxiety and depression. By the time I was 21, I was drinking and or high anytime I wasn't in class or at work. I'm sure most of you are aware, alcohol, drugs, and depression are a very bad combination. I planned my suicide many times. No one I knew suspected my plan, and I'm sure had no clue how I felt. I'm sure that I would have eventually died. But God had other plans. I met Jesus Christ right before my 21st birthday. I had not been to church since I was 17 and had no intention of ever going again. A lady I worked with invited me to come hear Nicky Cruz. I wanted to hear him because I had read his book when I was younger. He wasn't speaking at a church, but at the rodeo arena, so I agreed to go. I can't explain what happened except to say that God touched me that night and I became a new person. I do not remember anything he said. In fact, I didn't even realize he had a strong accent until years later when I heard him again. The Spirit of God was so strong in my mind, heart, and soul. I surrendered my life to Jesus that night, July 25th, 1981. I was delivered from drugs and alcohol that night, plus the fear, shame, and guilt were gone. I became extremely involved in church and a couple of years later went to work for Teen Challenge in Alabama. I planned on working there the rest of my life. But again, God had other plans. I came home for Christmas and met my husband of 35 and a half years at church in my hometown. The next several years were spent having and raising our 3 sons. We were involved in church and being right with God. Gradually, I became very self-righteous and judgmental. I had everything figured out, from Bible theology to how you should raise your children. I had all the answers and was very willing to tell you what you needed to know. All the while, depression and suicidal thoughts were my constant companions. I just couldn't be perfect enough. My husband took a new job. We had been beef and hay farmers and was doing very well. This company, like many others, had contests and nice trips where alcohol flowed freely. I decided I could drink normal, just to be social. So after 17 years of sobriety, I started drinking again. 10 years later, I was in detox on suicide watch. As I said, alcohol and clinical depression are a deadly combination, and I wasn't delivered the second time. I remained sober with the help of a 12-step program for 6 years. In 2009, we had to file bankruptcy. The day I realized that we would lose our family home, I started drinking again. I just couldn't face losing my home. Most of my drinking, I was not continually drunk, but I drank every day, just some days more than others. However, when situations would come up and my depression accelerated, my drinking would start spiraling out of control, and it was always a deep, fast spiral. 6 years ago, I started one of those deep, dark spirals. I did not want to live and believed everybody I loved would be better off without me. I really wanted to die. By this time, my relationship with God was pretty much non-existent. I didn't want to be a hypocrite, so I didn't go to church, and besides, I couldn't respect church people that I partied with. A quote that pretty much summed me up was, "No creature on earth was more certain to suffer frustration and dissatisfaction with life than a bitter cynic with a damp wad of compassion at her core." And the AA saying, "The cold wind of hopelessness blows right through it." The end of October 6 years ago, my marriage was nearing its end, but God had other plans again. I'd come to see a counselor here at the church a couple of times. The verse she gave me was, "I will repay you for the years the locusts have eaten," Joel 2:25. I could not believe it at the time, but that is exactly what God has done. My first night at CR, I was hopeless, helpless, physically sick, and terrified. I did not know one person here, and my life was so out of control, and I felt this was my last chance. I don't remember much of the first few weeks I came, but I kept coming back and immediately joined a step study. Those ladies and my small group co-leader were my lifelines. They prayed for me, cried with me, loved me, and stayed by me until I accepted God's grace back into my life. Matthew 18:12 and 13. What do you think? If a man owns 100 sheep, won't he leave the 99 in the hills to look for the one that has strayed? And if he finds it, truly I tell you, he rejoices over that sheep. I was that lost sheep, and Jesus found me. God used CR to bring this lost sheep home. It was not easy or fast, but gradually, as I worked the steps, my faith was rekindled and my desire for alcohol faded. That was 6 years ago. 6 years ago tonight was my last drunk, and I have been sober for 6 years. And that is only by the grace of God. The depression is under control with medication and no alcohol most of the time. I love coming to CR and have godly female friends that I love with all my heart. My marriage has been restored. God has restored what the enemy had taken. All has not been roses either. My husband was diagnosed with cancer. We spent 2 years in doctor's offices with chemo, radiation, and hospital trips. While his prognosis is good, watching someone you love go through unimaginable pain is very difficult. This past year has been difficult for me, as it has been for all of us. Isolation combined with fear, confusion, uncertainty, and anger over the political climate began to swirl around in my mind over and over again, basically paralyzing me. I felt like I was on a ride that was making me sick and I couldn't get off. The result was crippling depression and anxiety, and since I know me, the next step down would be to take a drink, just to escape it. I reached out to godly CR sisters who I knew would pray for me, and of course they did. I started Principle 1, Question 1 again. Realize I am not God. I admit that I'm powerless to control my tendency to do the wrong thing and that my life is unmanageable. What do I have control over, and what do I not have control over? By starting back at the beginning, I was able to get out of that swirling vortex, at least on most days. Next, I went to Principle 7, reserve a daily time with God for self-examination, Bible reading, and praying in order to know God and His will for my life and to gain the power to follow His will. I had gradually slipped on this one. I was just going through the motions, mindless prayer, reading devotions instead of reading my Bible, and not even really thinking about God's will. Then I went to Principle 8, yield myself to God to be used to bring this good news to others, both by my example and by my words. In other words, I started reaching out to others instead of sitting in my own self-pity. Since COVID started in March, I have gradually come to realize that even though CR is a major part of my recovery, it cannot be a substitute for my relationship with Jesus. I had lost sight that CR is a tool for Jesus to use and one that is extremely important in my recovery, but I must rely on Jesus first and foremost. So maybe there is a bright side to COVID. I don't always do this program perfectly, but I keep trying, and as I grow in my faith and continue to work the steps, Jesus peels off layer after layer, revealing new areas I need to work on in my recovery. With God's grace and mercy, I will continue to do the next right things so that I may be reasonably happy in this life and supremely happy with Him forever in the next. Thank you for letting me share.
God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Living one day at a time, enjoying one moment at a time, accepting hardship as the pathway to peace, taking as Jesus did, this sinful world as it is, not as I would have it. Trusting that He will make all things right if I surrender to His will, that I may be reasonably happy in this life and supremely happy with Him forever in the next. Amen.